Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about a recent legal battle over a law passed by the Ontario Doug Ford government that would take out bike lanes on three major Toronto streets. The Reducing Gridlock and Saving You Time Act was immediately challenged by a coalition of cycling activists once it was passed. The cyclists argue that removing bike lanes increases the risk of harm to cyclists and pedestrians, infringing on Section 7 of the Charter, which guarantees the right to life and security of person. The cyclists argue that bikers still need to use these routes, but will now be forced to do so in mixed traffic with cars, which is far less safe. The government has defended their position by emphasizing the economic and societal impacts of gridlock traffic and argues that this is a policy choice. While the case works its way through the courts, the cyclists asked for an injunction to stop the government from removing the bike lanes. The injunction was initially denied, but then the cyclists were ultimately successful in getting it. So for now, the bike lanes stay. What are we to make of all of this? Here today to discuss the case are two experts, Albert Cole and Stefan Serafin. Thank you both so much for joining me today. First, let's talk about the underlying claim. The Cycling Coalition says that removing the bike lanes threatens their Section 7 charter right to life and security of person. Albert, can you tell me why they say this?
Well, quite simply, the argument is that removing bike lanes means that cyclists' safety, their right to life and security is being infringed. In other words, bike lanes make it safer to cycle. Without bike lanes, now they're going to be put in peril. And they're also saying that that deprivation is happening contrary to the principles of fundamental justice. In other words, this law is arbitrary, it's disproportionate. In other words, removing bike lanes really has very little to do, based on the evidence, about dealing with congestion. And so removing bike lanes and trying to connect it to the problem of congestion, which is a real problem, there's simply no strong connection based on the evidence.
Now, I do want to get to Section 7, and get Stefan's perspective on this. But before we do, maybe, Albert, you can paint a picture of what it is like to bike in Toronto. You know, I am a cyclist myself, and I actually use one of the very bike lanes that Ford wants to remove. So maybe you can explain what it is like for those people watching this who maybe don't live in Toronto, don't fight traffic on a bike.
Well, getting bike lanes has been a long fight. So I've personally been involved for almost 20 years getting bike lanes on Bloor Street in Danforth. And that's really one of the core routes. In other words, it's above the subway, it's flat, it gets you to a lot of places, including the university, stores, restaurants, and so on. So it's a very key bike lane, and now we've been connecting that to north-south routes. But ultimately, only 4% of city roads so far have bike lanes. So that means on 90% of roads, there are no bike lanes. And we know, for example, over the past year, when 6 cyclists were killed in the city, all of them were on roads without bike lanes. There was one exception where there was a bike lane in place, and that bike lane was actually blocked. So we know that roads that don't have bike lanes are dangerous. And we certainly appreciate, as cyclists, we appreciate the benefits of bike lanes, especially protected bike lanes.
Now, Stefan, I want to get your take on this. How do you think Section 7 might apply in this case, the Charter guarantee to life and security of person, if it applies at all? And how do those principles of fundamental justice that Albert referenced, how do those work in this case, if they do?
So, I mean, on a more abstract level, of course, people have a right to liberty, life, liberty, security of the person. The issue here is, well, it's really the principles of fundamental justice. And traditionally, what it meant was that the government was acting in a way that impinged on procedural fairness or some other substantive legal guarantee. There is no such real issue in this case. This is an issue of trade-offs. The government is prioritizing things other than bike lanes, and whether one thinks that bike lanes are a good idea or not. The claim fundamentally here is, yes, we're putting bike lanes in, and that may benefit some people, give them extra security, but other people are inconvenienced by this, or in fact, their right to life, liberty, security of the person may well be infringed by the decision to put in bike lanes. And so to make this into a Section 7 claim is, I would suggest, quite dubious
Mhm.
for all of those reasons.
We've got to go to break now, but we will be right back.